Aloha, my friends and family. I'm so excited to welcome today's guest with you today, ZofiaRennea Morales, and she is coming to us from the West Coast. Hi. Oh,
Hi, can we reboot?
aloha, my friends and family. Thank you for joining us today and welcome back to the show. Today's guest I have with us, joining us from the West Coast, is ZofiaRennea Morales. She
Yay!
is, yay, I know, such a beautiful name to pronounce. Thank you for
Thank you.
that. So excited to have you on the show today, Zofia. And yeah, thank you for being here.
And I'm so excited to be here. I love having these conversations, and I know what we discussed before we hit record. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I love these topics.
Oh, me too. Yes, we're going to dive into topics such as how do we thrive as sensitives in the world? What are our coping strategies? What are some spiritual tools that we can use that are practical in our everyday life? And some tips for busy, overwhelmed parents working, raising children, living and wanting to thrive, but feeling maybe more like they're in survival mode, specifically in the area of the reason that we put off things like exploring our intuition and grounding in meditation daily, because I do hear this often in our community too, that it's something that gets put on the back burner because we're too busy. So excited to
Yeah,
dive into those conversations today.
absolutely. Me too. And if you are one of these people who like the meditation falls to the bottom of the list periodically, I would share with you that yes, that is a cycle that happens in my life also. Just because I'm awakened and hopefully headed on enlightenment does not mean that I'm perfect in any way. I remain human. And there are mornings where, you know what, the extra 20 minutes of sleep is what I need more than the meditation that day.
Yeah, for sure. And I like to just remind listeners that meditation can look and feel differently each day and in different cycles of life. And sometimes it can be walking your pet, or sometimes it is pure silence, sitting on the floor for
Yeah.
20 minutes.
Well,
Sometimes
walking
it's
your pet is moving meditation,
Mhm.
honestly. If you release all of the mind chatter while you're doing it and you're just present with your dog or your children or whoever you're walking with, it's very definitely a meditation. So you get points for that. It
Yeah.
does not have to be sitting in the corner on your cushion.
So hopefully already we've inspired you and invited you into our conversation, and just knowing and that meditation can look and feel differently daily, but it's really about the intention of presence in your daily life that is what starts to shift things.
Yeah.
So
Well, and there's one other thing I'd like to throw in on that because I've been moving into the hypnosis world and this sort of thing. And I've met up with a few people recently who are like, oh, well, I can't be hypnotized. And oh, I can't meditate because I've got this ADD thing happening. And that's not a truth. It's just the traditional forms of meditation are not the doorway for you. When you have those kinds of situations where your brain is a little like a trapped squirrel, actually, the moving meditation is the better doorway a lot of times because it's the rhythmic movement of your body that allows you to lull the mind into a space where it winds down and it gives you some headspace. And so if you're in that category, sitting on a pillow in the corner is the antithesis of what you need to get
mm,
your brain to relax and let loose. So I would like to just acknowledge if you've had this challenge in the past that you are okay. You're just wired a little differently and you need to move into it from a different space. And so I would invite you to explore moving meditation
mm,
as an option.
yes, I love moving meditation, all types of meditation that can be super helpful. So I'd like to invite you to just share with the listeners how you got to where you are. Like, were you always this spiritual? Were you always leading and coaching others in this space?
No. Big, bold capital letters, no. And I can't go into the entire story or we'll spend our entire episode on this and we have valuable tools we want to give people. But I will tell you that I was the most right-brained, 2 + 2 = 4. It must be replicatable. Show me the evidence kind of person that you have ever met in your life. That's where I started. And well, sort of started. I started my adult life in that mode. As a child, I was intuitive, but I was in a situation of what I would call a religious abuse that made it not safe to see things or to know things or to talk to angels. And so I shut it down like really, really hard and went as far away from that as I could, because I was told that if you did that, you were of the devil, which turns out to be a big fat lie. And it's part of the religious complex's survival mechanism and a means by which they maintain control over people. And so I shut it down hard and I went way humanistic.
Yeah, you were a biophysicist.
Yes, I was trained in
Yeah.
biophysics. And then I went into the Fortune 100 and I did data centers. I ran data centers for several years. And then gradually moved more into the helping aspect of things. One of the things that I did when I was in the Fortune 100 that I absolutely adored was I established a brown bag financial lunch seminar, because I discovered that everybody that worked for me in the data center had little to no understanding of how money works in this world. And it seemed to me that that's a fundamentally wrong thing, to be working for one of the premier banks in the world and to have this whole pack of people in the bank that don't understand how to balance their checkbooks. How do you know if this is the right kind of insurance? Do you have enough? Do you not have enough? Have you got a retirement account? And so I got that going and I got hooked on helping.
So that seems to be where it began. And you and I have shared, we've talked about, since we're going to move into thriving as a sensitive in the world, a lot of times the guests on this show, they have some type of, in my words, I use a breakdown in their life. It's either in their health or their marriage or their finances. Those are usually the top three, where for you and I, both our bodies spoke to us and we kind of got a wake up call. Mine was a near death experience through liver failure. Yours was Lyme disease.
Yes, and it was near death also, because I'd had it for decades.
So you can look back on your life and see this, I want to say, like the soul, the spirit of who you were intuitive as a child. You're creating this opportunity for people in data centers to come together, and you created this luncheon program and discovered that you liked helping people, which for former right-brained people, that's another thing that we share in common. I'm a former mechanical engineer. So then we find out that we're really heart-centered and it's part of our gift. And then you have this experience where your body's like, so in my words, I say we get a soul upgrade. It's like the vibration of our physical body is not vibrating in alignment with our soul frequency. And the body's just like, I'm not doing this anymore. Like, if you want to like live your truth, what your soul came here to do, then you need to wake up. And your body just kind of spoke to you and had a crisis or a breakdown. And then what happens? Like what happens in your life at that point? How do things start to change?
Well, here's kind of how I see it now that I'm through it. At the time, I wouldn't have described it this way. But looking back on everything that led up to that moment of crisis, I'd had a lot of invitations into living something more, looking beyond the confines of what science can confirm or deny. And I passed by all those exits. And at some point, your soul is like, look, lady, the time is now. And looking back on it, had I embraced one or more of those possibilities, I don't think I'd have ended up in this place. But I was raised by a German and a Norwegian, and I've got a double dose of stubborn and stoic. And so I'm moving through my life like with my eyes closed and my hands over my ears going, I don't hear you.
Mm.
And so my soul had to use the spiritual 2x4 upside the head to get my attention. And looking at my patterns and the patterns of my clients, uh, the soul will use whatever is most important to you to get your
Mm.
attention. And so
Yes.
if it's your career, it will take your career. If it is your body and you're so proud of your physical prowess, it will take your ability to do whatever it is you're doing with your body. In my case, it was my big, beautiful brain. Very proud of that big, beautiful brain. It's won me a lot of accolades over the course of my life, and it started taking my brain. And Lyme disease will do that. It's relative of syphilis. It will literally eat your brain.
Wow.
And so that's what was happening with me. And my moment of crisis arrived. My soul had been trying to get my attention for a while because we were in bankruptcy. I couldn't hold down a job anymore. My husband had lost his job. His industry had been changing fundamentally. And so he was at this point employed at a third of what his normal salary was. I was not working. We were in bankruptcy, and it was a bad situation. And he, at that time, decided he needed to go back for another degree in order to change how he was working in this world. And I agreed with that. But how do you do that when you're in bankruptcy, right? And so I went through this whole set of hurdles. And things were starting to kind of look up because we'd gotten the bankruptcy taken care of. We'd figured out how he was getting his degree. He's doing that. He's working. And I have finally gotten a diagnosis. Lyme, yay. I know what it is. We can do something with it. And I got this treatment plan from the doctor, which was 2 years long. And he'd given me the printout of the first year, and it's all these rotating exotic antibiotics and IVs and all this kind of stuff. And it has expensive written all over it. And so I called the insurance company to find out, what are you going to cover? And the insurance lady said, chronic Lyme. We don't believe in chronic Lyme. Well,
Wow.
isn't that convenient for them? And so, upshot of that conversation, they were going to pay for 2 months of oral antibiotics, full stop. And by the way, your doctor's no longer in network. Yikes. What am I going to do? Right now, I'm a cash pay client. I'm in a bankruptcy, so there's no extra money. My husband's working a full time job, taking care of me in the house and going back to school full time. I can't make dinner in 30 minutes. It takes me like 3 hours because I can't remember what I'm doing. And so I'm like literally starting over at every moment, trying to figure out what the next step is. It's gotten really extreme. I can't work. So how on earth are we going to pay for this answer? And I ran through all of my options, and I decided it might be time to call my dad. Now, I was raised by a German and a Norwegian, and they were very clear. You turn 18, you are on your own. You're paying for your own stuff. Don't expect to come back and live in the basement. Don't bring your laundry over here. You're an adult. You will take care of your stuff. And so I've been taking care of my stuff for several decades. But I figured maybe this one might maybe be the exception, because there's quite literally no other way that I could see to get to healthy. And I talked to my dad, and the bank of dad was empty. And it was that night when we went to bed that I just, my brain is spinning with all the things. I'm going down all these dead ends that I've already been down. And I can't sleep. My brain hasn't been putting me through sleep cycles since I started the first set of antibiotics, because Lyme is toxic when you have it, and it's worse when you kill it off because it just explodes and all the toxins come out at once. So I'm literally not sleeping. I physically can't sleep. But I've discovered that if I can get into a meditative state, I feel a little better in the morning. But that wasn't going to happen that night. There was just no way. And so it was around 3 o'clock in the morning that I just gave up, I think is probably the best description for it. It sounds fancy to say I surrendered. No, I
You
just
just get too
gave the
tired.
frick up. It's like I
Yeah.
got nothing. And that's where I was. I got nothing. And I decided that it might be time to talk to God.
Hmm.
Hadn't talked to him since I was a very young girl. Had God greatly convoluted with the twisted fundamentalist religion that I was raised with. But thinking back on that time in my life, part of the challenge I had with the religion I was raised in was they believed a lot of stuff that I knew not to be true
Mhm.
about God. God is love. God is very accepting. God doesn't judge any of us for what we're going through down here and the choices we've made to get through the day. There's no hell. God would not do that, let alone for such a silly reason as, well, you never heard of the particular fundamentalist sect that I'm in, and we're the only ones that are right.
Mhm.
Um, and so I decided that I was going to throw away all that crap that I'd been taught about God. And I was going to talk to the God that I knew. And I said, God, I will do anything to get better. And I meant it with all of my being. I've never meant anything more in my life. And I got this answer immediately in the form of a little voice in the back of my mind that said, really, anything? And I thought on that for a good long while because
Yeah.
anything doesn't really have edges, right? And I do have some edges, and my edges are I believe in treating other people decently. I want to be completely honest and fair. I don't intentionally hurt anyone. These are my edges, right? And then I thought about what I know about God, and I came to the conclusion that the God that I knew was not going to ask me to lie, cheat, steal, become an axe murderer, any of that kind of thing. That's all the garbage that came from this humanized religion stuff I was raised with. And so, just to be perfectly clear, I said, God, for you, I will do anything. And I got my first miracle because I fell asleep. And when I woke in the morning, I knew the direction I was to go, the next step. I didn't know what the final outcome was to be or the path, but I was very confident in what the step was. And that was to go get a clearing IV. And that was like the first step down the road because ultimately I was led to having my Lyme cured not in 2 years, but in 3 months.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I usually forget to tell that because I get so sucked into the awakening side of my story,
Mhm.
which happened in the office of the naturopath herbalist I'd been sent to by the
Mhm.
doctor that I couldn't afford anymore.
Mhm.
And even that in its own way was a miracle because if if it had been suggested to me just a day earlier than having gone through all of this, I'd have went, an herbalist? Are you kidding me?
Yeah. Yeah.
The scientist would have had like no desire to go down that
Yeah.
road at all.
Thank you for sharing that story. It's such a powerful story. And I have a similar story, and I've had other guests on the show that have had a similar story. And I always like to say, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And so many times, and maybe these are coping strategies we're going to get into, but so many times, um, you said that I looked back and there were so many moments where, I could have listened, but I didn't. And I think that's where a lot of people hang out until
Yeah.
they're finally ready to, either they're exhausted or their body is shutting down or their marriage is shutting down or something. And you said I stopped fighting.
Yes.
Surrender sounds beautiful, but I had a similar experience. Like, I just wanted to check out. Like, I was like, I'm done. This is so hard, so
I
hard.
I got nothing. Yeah.
Yeah, so hard. Um, and yet you had these moments where you didn't listen, and then you had this experience, and it changes the course of your life. Now you're with an herbalist and you're healing it in 3 months. And I've just heard so many stories like this. I think when you live in this world, like, you hear a lot of these stories, and yet because the herbalist isn't covered by insurance, like, people aren't going to go, and they're going to do the thing that feels safe
Yeah.
and the thing that they think they're supposed to do, when really the kind of the miracle is that stretch and trusting that the thing that seems like it's not going to work is going to work, and then you don't know till you get to the other side of it.
Yeah. Well,
um
and that was one of the things I discovered as I went through this health thing myself. Um, the conventional medicine that we have out there right now and how it's set up with insurance, I think there were some good intentions behind that when they established that. Because there were snake oil salesmen and people who were obviously selling bogus things. So there's something to be said for, yes, your doctor had to go through an accredited program to get the skills that he had. Yes, the the things that the insurance company will cover have been proved over and over and over that these are efficacious things. But the problem is the insurance and the pricing on this stuff has become handcuffs in a lot of ways. And if you step away from the insurance, uh, the beautiful thing that happens is the handcuffs come off.
it's freedom.
It's freedom.
Yeah,
Uh, but
but it's scary to think that.
with freedom comes responsibility. And one of the
That's it.
things you're responsible for is covering the cost of your care. And when you move into the alternative world, the place where the herbalists and the acupuncturists and the hypnotists and stuff live, there are amazing things that become available to you, but you are responsible for paying for that care yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also a very different focus in that world, because the focus in that world is not on just making you comfortable in your illness, which is the conventional way,
Mm-hmm.
but bringing you into full health,
Yeah, the
really
root
becoming
cause.
vibrant and energetic and thriving, which requires a larger commitment on your side, both in terms of time and money. But it gets you the things that you've been seeking other
Mm.
places that are false solutions. It gets you the energy that that cup of coffee promises you, but doesn't truly deliver on, you
Yeah,
know?
I think we could do a whole episode just on this. I'm so passionate about just educating people on choices. I mean, health, freedom, and that, your podcast is Sovereign Self. I mean, health, like, when I think of sovereignty over my body, that is to me health, freedom. And I had to
Yeah.
get there through when, I mean, conventional medicine has a place and a time. They saved my
Oh,
life,
absolutely.
but
Absolutely.
the possibility of, like, just redoing your whole body holistically is sustainable, and it's,
Yeah.
you get to that thriving place. So I want to kind of step off the path a little bit, and because I do, in my experience, and I of course tend to attract what we're going to call sensitives, maybe an empath, intuitives, which you and I probably agree. I've heard you speak on your podcast before. We all have access to this.
Yes.
And we have conversations that attract people who are probably knowingly sensitive, or maybe they don't know, but they're tired all the time, or
Yes.
they've got
And
some.
they've taken on all the cares of the world, and they're dragging all this responsibility around with them for their employer, for their coworkers, for their children, for their spouse, for their family. Um, because some of us come into the world turned on with our gifts more than others. And we are in no way raised to understand what that is. let alone to be shown how to work with it in a way that's supportive for us. And so we develop coping mechanisms that help us to a degree, but that are also highly dysfunctional.
Mm.
And it's completely understandable, okay? Because if you're right next to somebody who's not turned on in the same way that you are, um, they're dealing with a fraction of the input that you as a sensitive person are. Okay. It's hard as a human being to say no to someone else. We'll take on people pleasing for a minute, right? Okay. There are all kinds of courses on assertiveness that will teach you how to say no to somebody else. And
Mm.
so you put a highly sensitive person in there and a relatively shut down, gift wise person in there. And the one that comes out of that course going, "This is so amazing. It changed my life," is the one that isn't as turned on and tuned into their gifts, because it has actually given them a tool that they can use with relatively little backlash. But the highly sensitive person going through that same experience not only has to work up the skills and the courage to say no, but now they have to deal with the backlash of the emotions of the person who've just received that no.
Mhm.
And that's why if you've ever been through one of these, you're like, I can't do it. I know I should say no, but I just can't do it. That's why. And what they didn't teach you in that class is how to be able to tune out from the emotional backlash, how to divert the emotional backlash away from you so you don't have to receive that in your system.
So do you have a tip on that? Because I know a lot of people pleasers.
Oh, there are a lot of different ways. And one of my favorite tips is get this book. Okay. It's by a lady called Rose Rosetree. And she has a 4-book empath series. It's called Empath Empowerment. And you want book one. Book one is the workbook, and it's the foundation for all this stuff. And you don't even need the other 3. The workbook will be plenty, and it's a 30-day workbook. This isn't like I'm going to sit down and read it in an hour and have all the answers. You literally spend 10 minutes today and you do this and you go, okay, I'm going to experiment with this particular approach, because we're all wired a little bit differently. And so she's got 30 different ways for you to tune up and tune down the input that's coming for you. And I went through the entire 30 days. I'm an impatient person. So I'm like, what do you mean just one every? Okay, fine, I will do it. And I came out of it with a half a dozen things that are like my core go-to tools. Uh, but you going through it would probably come away with a different subset of tools because of how you're wired. And so that's why I don't just like throw out a tip, because what I find is if I give a tip, there'll be, 25-30% of the people out there who are like, this is the most amazing thing since sliced bread, and then everybody else is like, well, that was bullshit because it wasn't the thing that they needed. And so I would say get that book and work through it.
So I'm wondering if we can take a step back
Yeah.
to helping somebody identify if they are sensitive, because what I find is that many people in conversations are telling me things that they're experiencing, and they're choosing these coping mechanisms. And then I'd like to go to invite listeners to understand a few more of those coping mechanisms. And they have these patterns that you've talked about, that you had, and that we see probably in both of our clients. But the first step is awareness, and kind of, I would say, the ownership that this is happening. Because I think a lot of times we shut it down. Like, what are some tools that you can share with people that might help them understand, oh, maybe that is me? I mean, so
Yeah.
maybe I'm a people pleaser, but yeah.
Here's a few things. Okay. If you're a people pleaser, I'm going to submit that you probably are highly sensitive. Okay. Especially if you've been through some of this assertiveness stuff and it's like, no, this is not working for me. That'd be a real strong indicator that there's something additional going on for you. in my childhood and in my youth, and even as I grew into an adult, I had a lot of people telling me, well, you need to toughen up, you need to get a thicker skin, and that sort of thing. If you hear a lot of that, you are likely a highly sensitive person. Um, and even as I moved into the corporate world, okay, I worked and played with the men. Okay, data center, you've got like one woman and 25 guys. This is kind of the proportion. And so I had to grow really freaking thick skin
Mm-hmm.
when I was in corporate because I'm working and playing with the guys and they tend to be not dialed in. Men are not raised and trained to be dialed in. Um, and so if you've been in that situation where it's like, oh God, I have to just like really brace myself to even go in this room full of people who play this way. Yeah, you're probably a highly sensitive person. If you would rather hide in your house and be long ways away from anybody, if you need significant amounts of downtime after you've been with a group,
Yeah.
these are all strong indicators that yes, you are highly sensitive and probably likely an empath. If you go into a meeting and walk out with a headache that had nothing to do with the meeting, nothing happened to you at the meeting, but you were just in the meeting and you walked out with a headache, I'm going to suggest that not only are you a highly sensitive person, but you're probably also a physical empath.
Yeah.
Because I would bet you dollars to donuts that taking painkillers did nothing for that headache.
Yeah.
That's another indication that you're actually carrying somebody else's energy. You picked up somebody else's pain energy while you were in that meeting.
Yeah.
And so taking an Advil afterwards is not going to do any good
Mm. You
because
know,
it didn't come from your body.
one of the I think the most exhausting and biggest challenges that I've experienced being energetically sensitive is traveling, like on the airplane. I just did this last
Oh
night,
yeah.
right? All the way
Mm-hmm.
from Hawaii. There's like no fresh air, and you're in this tiny little area, and you're getting exposure to X-rays and so many people.
And then
And
all the people around you. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's that is another one too. And I think the biggest clue for me is just that exhaustion. Like it's just like you're eating, you're probably eating well and moving well. And I hear this a lot, like people who take care of their health and well-being, or
Yeah.
they've got to
I'm
focus on it.
doing all the things, right? I've gone gluten free and I'm getting the exercise and I've right sized my body. I'm not
Right.
dragging around a bunch of extra weight and I'm still, oh, yeah,
Exhausted, particularly after being around big groups of people, or maybe your
yeah,
family, or if you're in a friend group that isn't
yeah.
aligned,
Or
or
particular people, right? Every now and
particular
again, you'll
people.
have a person that's, yeah, especially detrimental.
Yeah, so we just want to invite the listeners to pay attention to those cues. And just as you shared, you had those experiences that were speaking to you, and when you look now, because you know what they are, and you
Yeah.
could look back and see them. And I've had my own experiences. I shared with you that narcissistic friendship partnership that I
Yes.
was in, and I would get migraines every time we had like a business meeting, and I just didn't understand. And
Yeah.
now, like, I was ignoring my intuition. And so those are just, some of the signs. So what are some of the other coping strategies that sensitives are showing up in our lives? So we
Yeah.
talked about people pleasing.
We talked about people pleasing. We do tend to be helpers, which is a beautiful thing. It's part of our mission here to help other people. But some of us take it to the extreme of, I need to fix everybody around me in order for me to be okay. That's another dysfunctional sensitive person coping mechanism. Um, and it kind of makes logical sense on a certain level. It's like I'm getting all of this dysfunctional energy from the people around me. If I can make them all okay, then I'll feel better. But the problem with that coping strategy is you can't fix anyone, and no one's going to change until they're damn good and ready. And the surest way to ruin a relationship is to try to fix somebody before they're ready. And
Mhm.
that can be a hard one to let go of.
Do you think that that is like a little bit of an avoidance pattern?
It can also be an avoidance pattern, right? Because it's much easier to look at someone else and go, well, if you would only, fill in the blank, whatever it is, take responsibility for your actions, plan forward a little bit, or whatever the thing is. If you only had a little bit more self-esteem, it would all be better for you. It's easy to see that in someone else. It's, first of all, harder to see our own patterns. And then it's humbling to have
Yeah.
to accept that I have this thing that I need to work on.
Hmm.
And a lot of us have been told to been shown bad ways to have self-esteem, right? We have to be superwoman with the cloak, and we get the kids to school on time, looking sharp, and we're holding down a high-powered career, and dinner's on the table and beautiful at 6 p.m. and all the things, better homes and gardens house. And that's not actually where your self-esteem comes from. I was trained to gain my self-esteem through doing,
Hmm.
and self-esteem is a beingness thing. It's not a
Yeah.
doingness thing. And when you're busy with the doing, you can kind of forget that it's a being thing for a while.
It's a glamorous distraction.
It is a glamorous distraction. And even in some ways, doing your work can also be a glamorous distraction
Do
in
you
some
mean your
ways.
commitment to like personal development and spiritual growth? Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Not so much in doing the work, but there's like a certain amount of, I don't know what word to use with it. It's not quite victimhood, because
Yeah.
on its face, you're leaving that behind. But on the other hand, you're like, well, I have all this huge pile of work I
Yeah.
have to do before I can be on my mission. No, it's a, a two-pronged approach, right? You do your
Mhm.
work as you're on your mission, and you're on your mission as you do your work. And that's when you end in a balanced place.
Yeah, I don't know who said it, but somewhere I remember seeing a quote, um, the result is the journey. And that's what I think of as I hear
Yes.
you say that. And I think there can be an addiction to healing. Like I've seen
Yeah.
that in, the spiritual community as well. One other thing I've noticed, and I'm curious about your take on this, because I think it expands from surface level to energetically, is struggling with healthy boundaries, which I think is people pleasing and the power of no, but
Yes, there's
also
some of that.
but also as an empath, like, so and I can remember in my own personal experience having this feeling. So let's dive into kind of intuition. And it depends on, who you talk to. There's four main types of intuition, possibly six if we get into smell and taste, but or I guess, there's the clairvoyance, which
The
is the
Clairs,
sight,
yeah.
and the
Hmm.
four clairs. So I can remember being in a place, I guess it was probably 10 years ago, where I was like, oh my gosh, okay, I am clairvoyant and clairaudient. And, there's a lot that comes up with that. Like it's,
And it's kind of shocking initially.
and once you accept it and open it up, it can come really quickly, and then you can learn that you get to choose and you get to discern what you want to allow to come in, and what you don't, in my experience. And so that is where the healthy boundaries, I think, comes in, because this is kind of like subconscious. It's like, what I'm trying to say is, like, our behaviors and patterns on the surface can show us that we don't have healthy boundaries, and then that, as a sensitive, it's just showing us that's what's happening energetically, and sometimes we
Yeah.
can take on too much. And then what I started to notice is, well, if I have clairvoyance and clairaudience, well, I sure would really love if somebody else could see me the way I could see them, right? And so
Yeah.
then you go into like over, it's almost like, or in my experience, I overshared or overgave or what, but I really wanted to be in that space because I wanted to feel like it was normal, and I wanted to just feel like, well, doesn't everybody, can't, because here we are saying everybody has access to this, but most people aren't accessing that.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
and it's sort of, I use this analogy, right? When you're in school, there are some people who are great at like gym class and sports and this kind of thing, and other people are more history buffs. And then you've got your math people and you've got your reading people, you've got your artist people, right? And everybody kind of has a certain subset of predispositions. And when you're dealing with someone who's in the highly sensitive person arena, who's an empath, who's got their clairs turned on, they're turning on, um, that's just one, what I want to say, one subcategory of giftedness. Um, and so it's not that the rest of the world can't learn to read or do math or whatever, but it's not the center of their world. Does it make sense?
Absolutely. I love how you used predisposition, because we could use that word for the way that we choose to eat or the way that we exercise, like everything in our life, or some things just we're more naturally aligned to than others.
Yeah,
So yeah, that
exactly. I mean, so anybody can learn to catch and throw a ball, but not everybody's going to be, Michael Jordan.
yeah, and aligning to, I guess, what's aligned for you, your I like your frequency, your values, what your soul came here to do, I guess, or what your soul's
Yeah.
aligning to is, I think the real secret sauce in that is that when you start to fine tune and step into that, it becomes easier.
It
And
does.
it becomes easier and more enjoyable, because you're no
Yeah.
longer doing it from a place of trying anymore. It's just more like allowing. And
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I kind of want to pivot back towards the boundaries conversation, because highly sensitive people tend to have really, unfortunately, low boundaries most of the time. Um, and as a woman, you're taught to have poor boundaries to start with. Okay, so there's the sociocultural part of it that goes into there as well, because women were for so many years chattel, and we belong to, the guy that we married or the father that gave us life, and really didn't have a lot of our own self-determination available to us just as a sociocultural thing in the West. So it's relatively new thing that women can even set boundaries for themselves. So if you've been having challenges with boundaries, give yourself a break around that, because you weren't raised to have good boundaries to start with. Um, and so you can't be expected to suddenly be the boundary queen. So give yourself some compassion on that front. That's the first thing that I always want, is compassion for where you're at. Um, but then you need to decide where you want the edges of you to be, because as a very sensitive empathic person, a lot of times you tend to include other people as part of your being in a lot of
ooh,
ways.
yeah.
And so it's super helpful to go through that Rose Tree book to start to understand where you leave off and the other person begins. That's a major
Mm.
part of the process that she puts you through in that book. And it starts to give you a better understanding of where the natural edges of people are. Okay. If you watch a child grow up, right? The the baby, the infant, everything is the infant. uh, it's their mom, is their crib, it's their body, and their world is all about them. And then they start to get a little bit older and they notice that, well, mom is kind of separate from me, and they go through those terrible twos where
Mhm.
it's like, okay, not your way, my way, there's some separation here, right? And then they learn to kind of be part of a group, they learn to share and to have friends that they play with and this sort of thing. And then at some point in the teenage years, they take that to an extreme, and your mom starts asking, well, and would you follow your friends off a cliff? Yes, actually, at that stage, probably I would. And then as we grow through that, we start to differentiate into an adult who understands that, it's not all about us. It's not all about the group. Sometimes it's good to be group. Sometimes it's good to separate from the group. And so we go through different stages of understanding what it is to be a person and relating with other people. And it's very similar in your growth as an empath. And a lot of us start with this really boundaryless kind of situation where my husband's headache is my headache, my children's disappointment in school is also my disappointment, and
Mhm.
so as you go through the process of recognizing that your energy is separate from their energy, it becomes a little easier to start to set those boundaries and to go, you know what, when I take your responsibility, I'm going to say it again, your responsibility, and it's hyphenated on purpose, I'm stealing from you.
Mhm.
And so at a certain stage, your child knows how to tie their shoes. You have to just
Mhm.
allow them to do that. At a certain stage, your child knows how to make a friend or get over a disappointment, and you have to allow them to choose their friends and to have their disappointments
Mhm.
and not interfere in that process to try to make it easier for them, because you're hurting them when you do that. And it's a loving thing to allow them the space to learn these things and to experiment with these things. And it gets even harder as people get older, and some of them have learned habits of dependency or manipulation or that sort of thing.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so as you start with the boundaries within your family, a lot of times you can grow out and it becomes easier to learn and to recognize the people who have these unfortunate patterns of what I want to say, victimhood or manipulation. And you can go, okay, I recognize you for what you are. And now that I know what you are, I can engage with you in a way that protects me,
Mhm.
as opposed to being sucked into the pattern or the trap.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think we can see this in our relationships with our parents and then our children and our spouses and our business partners and coworkers. And yeah, I shared my first health crisis, which was 16 years ago. I had a second health crisis, which was in 2014, which was my dad went into the hospital for open heart surgery, and my body, like I went into the emergency room that night he got out, and
Yeah.
his
Oh.
heart surgery ended up being like they did some things wrong, and he's been in heart failure ever since. And so that was really my realization of, like, I
How
was taking on his
connected you
energy.
two are. Yeah.
Right. I had low blood pressure and high blood pressure, and then like Pat like was fainting, like, and I didn't even know. And
Yeah.
anyway, I ended up going to the emergency room, which I was already on a holistic path and eating healthy. And so that was kind of my realization of, like, that's how we are having this conversation is, yeah,
That's
I was already eating healthy and doing all the things and already holistic, but I wasn't minding my energetic health. I wasn't
yes.
my, and
You
the
didn't have
voice.
that energetic separation from dad.
Right. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of people can probably relate to the things that we came here to work through. And I mean, I was like 38 years old when this happened, I was like not a child, but still going through this really. And I decided,
Yeah.
like, I'm not taking, this is not mine. This
Yeah.
is, and
I can't heal it. I can't fix it. I can't do, and it doesn't help him that I take it on either.
right.
Yeah.
Well, and then I see my parents and their codependent relationship and how that works. And, everybody has their
Well,
own journey,
you
but
and that was your original pattern for this is how you were connected to dad. You have to have this really
right.
close interwoven energy situation.
Mhm. And I
Yeah.
think it's something really helpful to be aware of too, is when, as parents, and what we, I can just see this in my relationships with my daughters too, is just, one of the things I tell them is just when you notice something, just ask yourself, is this mine? Like,
Yeah.
is this mine? And then if you can close your eyes and go into your body, and I love somatic practices, it helps you to understand, like, if it is yours, where is it in the body? Like, where did it come from? What does it feel like? And if it's not yours, it feels a little like off, but you actually have to slow down in that moment and be like,
And that's a
is this
great first
mine?
question. Is this even mine?
Yeah.
And back to responsibility, that's a similar sort of thing, right? If you've gotten into one of these overly codependent patterns, you will have taken on responsibilities from other people in your circle, whether it's always putting together the drugs for your husband, or taking care of certain aspects of your kids' schoolwork, or making sure that these things are happening. And it might be time to step back, especially if you're in this overwhelm mode, and go, okay, is this thing I'm really doing my responsibility, or is it somebody else's?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times when you're in that overwhelm, you have taken on things from other people because you don't trust that they can get them done, or maybe they screwed up with it in the past, or there are a million reasons that we do it. It's just easier than trying to convince them to do the thing they're supposed to do. We have a lot of excuses we'll have around that. But the first question is it really mine? And if
Yeah.
it's not mine, why am I doing this? And then how can I give it back to them?
Yeah, I love how you put response ability, response
Yes.
able, in order to, because it can be so disempowering to take that response ability away from them.
Yeah, it disempowers them and it disempowers you, because you're trying to leverage a point that's not your leverage. And so it's
Right,
much harder for you to do the thing because it doesn't belong to you.
right. Well, and that is the opposite of sovereign, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Which, by the way, is my word for 2022. So I love, yeah, I love any invitation or opportunity to practice sovereignty, which is
Yes. Well, and
every
it's so
day.
cool. You're coming on to Sovereign Self in just a couple of weeks
Yes,
as
I
well.
know. I'm looking forward to it. So some of the coping mechanisms that we covered were people pleasing, the rescuer, not having healthy boundaries. We talked, I think the response ability goes probably in line with the rescuer a little bit, just taking
Yeah.
on something that isn't yours. Is there any other one that comes to mind that you feel is important to share?
Well, I want to pivot back to the rescuer for just a minute. Okay. Because you can develop some discernment around rescuing, if you will. Um, many of us who have rescuer tendencies, and I am one of these people, so I know of which I speak, we have a tendency to rescue people who don't need rescuing. They're making a lot of noise and trauma, but they really honestly don't need rescuing.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I have noticed is the people who are ready to be rescued, a lot of times they're through all of the drama, and they're actually halfway doing the thing. They just need a little extra information, or an introduction in some direction, or maybe a tool of some sort. Okay. But if you're looking at somebody who's got a lot of Sturm and Drag and drama going around about their thing, um, and who's looking for, what do I want to say, a level of assistance that is not appropriate.
They're not willing
Uh,
to take
yeah,
self-responsibility.
they're not responding to their situation in any way. So they haven't owned responsibility for that. Those are the ones you need to take a pass on.
Yep.
It's
That is such a
hard.
good tip.
It is
Yes.
hard as hell, but those are the ones you need to take a pass on,
Mm-hmm.
because those are the ones that will pull you down with them and then will say, you're such a terrible person because you did not save me.
Yep. That's such a great tip, especially for anybody who's a healer or coach or even a parent, right? Like or in any relationship really, but it's at some point really realizing, like, that's that response able, like, this is theirs, this isn't mine, and we're
Yeah,
not here to save anybody. Nobody's here to save anybody. Everybody has a
exactly.
choice. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, That's a really great tip. Thank you for sharing that. As we bring this episode to a close, what are some ways that, so the Roseland book was a very
Rose
helpful.
tree.
Well,
Rose
Tree.
tree. Yes.
Rose Tree is the author. Is that
That
right?
is the
Okay.
author, and she has a 4-book empath series. It's called Empath
Mhm.
Empowerment. And book 1 is the one you want.
The workbook.
That's the workbook.
Any other, so that sounds like a great opener for identifying how I'm showing up in the world as an empath.
Yeah.
And
Well, and if
maybe,
you're really, really busy, right? Because we were talking about overwhelm a little bit.
Mhm.
It's a great place to start because it's little tiny mini bits. You can do a little bit of this. You can read it in the morning, practice it a little bit throughout the day, and then the next day you can do another one, which is nice. But I think the thing I want to mention is a lot of times we push this kind of stuff to the bottom of our list. Well, it would be kind of nice to, understand this more. This is survival. Okay, I'm going to just repeat that. This is survival skills that you've needed since you were knee high to a grasshopper that you did not get. And developing these survival skills will get you more time. It will allow you to set the boundaries that you need to take some of the crap off your plate that you're overwhelmed with. This is the lever that starts to crack open that door. This is the single most important thing you can do for yourself. Put it at the top. It will make all the difference.
I love that. And I agree so much. It's, with it comes clarity, healthy boundaries, more energy, deeper
More time.
relationships,
Yes.
more time,
Less guilt.
yeah, emotional freedom. Like,
exactly.
I mean, time freedom, even financial freedom. Like, all the things that I've discovered is that the thriving and the abundance, and the word that a course I've been teaching lately is called prosperity. That level of consciousness of receiving only what is there to help you thrive, and receiving and giving in a way that is aligned and in a cycle. It's not over giving to exhaustion, but doing it from a place of being resourced.
Yeah.
And this is your gateway to the listeners. Like, this is your gateway and your permission, because for the listeners, you're probably listening. If you're on this show, there's no, I believe you're supposed to be listening. You're probably navigating, am I a sensitive? How do I access these gifts? By the way, you have a really nice quiz, which we're going to drop in the show notes. It's called the Superpower Quiz, I believe.
Yes.
Is that
what
it's
is
called?
your number one spiritual superpower?
Yeah,
And
that's right.
I developed it because it's easy for us to look around this world and go, oh, if only I was so empathic like Jen. Oh, if only I could, whatever. Okay. The thing is, you have an amazing giftedness that is all yours. You don't need to be like anybody else. So this quiz is a mirror for you to look in so you can see the amazingness that is you. Because right now it's just the water that you're swimming in. And you have a tendency, I know I have a tendency to think, well, everybody's this way. No, not everybody's this way. Not everybody sees patterns the way Zofia does. Okay, this is a specific giftedness that I have, that I share with my clients. Okay, it's one of my skills. But it took me decades to recognize that that's a giftedness. I thought everybody saw patterns this way. So here's your opportunity to look in the mirror and see what your specialness is. And that's the first step to cultivating that, because we're trained to cultivate the places that we're weak instead of to build up and to recognize and celebrate the places that we're strong. And the places that we're strong, that's what we brought with us to succeed in this world. So I want you to know the places where you're strong.
Yeah, and the beautiful shift is you go from kind of like this energy of like spinning and not knowing and just being tired all the time to almost like being aligned and honed and clear. And, it's an invitation to keep practicing, right? Practicing every
Yeah,
day. Like, no, that's not mine. That's not serving me. Yes, this is my path. This is my soul. This is aligned. This is me. Sovereignty, like, so, really knowing and owning that can really just invite more of an abundance in your health and well-being and your energy. And like you said, the time and the whole thing. So so being strong, and also, there's a kind of a different frequency of life that you get to live through and operate
exactly.
from.
Well,
Yeah.
and the other thing that I'm going to put out there is we live under this falsehood that I will do it when I find time. You never, ever, ever find time. You make time. And
Yes, thank you.
if you don't make it as a person for yourself, your soul will eventually make it for you, and it's going
That's
to
so true.
suck.
That's so true. I was just reading a book. I just finished a book called The Big Leap, and it actually had one of the last chapters was all about relationship with time. This is actually where we start in my 6-month coaching program. It's all about energy management versus time management, but it's about the shift from the Newtonian method of time
Ticking
to,
clock,
yeah, to the Einstein, which is really just the
There's
belief that
always exactly enough
yeah,
time for what
you are
is really
time.
important. Yep.
You're the source of time. Time, time and money are always the two reasons that people put off things. And um, it's just interesting to watch people in those patterns, because there is an abundance of both if you choose to believe that in that space. That's kind of the prosperity consciousness, is this energy of giving and receiving. Like, there's an abundance, but most people live in scarcity, and especially of time, because it doesn't feel tangible like money. It's a
Yeah.
little different, but yeah,
Well, and you've just put your finger on one of the reasons that I went and got my hypnosis certification, because those kind of beliefs are profoundly difficult to shift because they sit in your subconscious. And if you approach it from the conscious side, if you're like, I have enough time, there's always enough time, you have to repeat that like 60,000 times before your subconscious goes, well, we might believe that maybe. But if
yeah.
you do hypnosis and you invite the conscious mind to sit off to the side and you work directly with the subconscious, then it can be shifted in an instant.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, again, freedom is the word that comes when you shift
Yeah.
into just that belief that I'm on time and
Yeah.
I'm
And I'm
in
arriving
time.
perfectly in time, regardless of what the clock says.
That's right. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. We'll definitely share
Thank
your
you so much for
quiz.
having me. I'm looking
Yeah, it's been a
forward to
super fun
having you on
conversation.
mine. I guess the other thing I will put out there is if something landed with you and you're like, I really, really, really need to talk to Zofia, I do have a 20-minute conversation that I do with people. It is free, it is no strings, and you can find that at bookzofiacoffeechat.com. That's
Awesome.
BOOKZOFIA, bookzofiacoffeechat.com.
Awesome.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for sharing that. Yes,
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
my pleasure. And thank you for listening in once again. And we'll see you on the show next week. Aloha.